Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining in today for today's GPSA webinar. Today, we're focusing on two pretty pertinent issues that face a lot of families and farming families especially. One of them is the incoming superannuation changes, and it seems to be a conversation around the table all the time, is succession. So today I have two presenters, Eben Lok from William Buck, who is the principal of the Wealth Advisory Team and a financial advisor, joins us today. And from Mellor Olsson, I have Nick Coutts, who is a senior associate working in wills and estates, where he creates and reviews wills and other important estate planning documents. So first off, we'll hear from Eben Lok from William Buck. He'll go through superannuation issues, contemporary issues, but also the incoming changes regarding Division 296. So that's a term you'll hear a lot about today. As always, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A chat box there that's available to you. And there'll be time for questions and answers with both Nick and Eben after their presentations. But I'll pass on to Eben. We'll just share Eben's. So there we go.
Great, thank you, Brendan. All right, so we're here to present on preparing for the 3 million Division 296 superannuation tax. Sorry. Just a disclaimer, this information is just general in nature, so it doesn't take into account your personal circumstances. So if you're needing financial advice, please seek a professional. Just an agenda here. So first, I thought I'd just set the scene, just to cover off on recent budget announcements regarding the current environment. So Treasury Chalmers delivered the most far-reaching changes to the Australian tax system in over a quarter of a century. These changes will impact everyone differently, and specialist advice is required. The most important thing to understand is that none of the measures have been legislated, but this is will be put before Parliament relatively soon. We continue to watch this space and adapt. I guess the main thing here is, fortunately, superannuation wasn't touched in these proposed budget changes. If we look at superannuation and what that is, so it's a long-term savings and investment scheme designed to help individuals fund their retirement. It's a vital component of the Australian financial and retirement system, highly regulated by government. It's a forced savings for eventual retirement. If you're an employer, if you're an employee, your employer's mandated to pay you 12% of your salary into superannuation. For many of our farming and agri clients who are self-employed, you can contribute up to $30,000 to superannuation each year and claim a tax deduction. The benefit is that contributions only taxed at 15%. In terms of building up your superannuation nest egg, there's also the ability to contribute $120,000 to super each year, subject to specific rules. Superannuation is quite flexible in the fact that you can have a variety of different types of funds. So there's industry, retail, and also self-managed superannuation funds. How is superannuation taxed? This is probably one of my favorite charts. The fact that if we look at the left-hand side of this chart, while you're accumulating your nest egg in superannuation, tax on earnings is only 15%. And then if we look at the blue side of the ledger, once you commence pension phase, assuming you're either retired from age 60 or reached age 65, tax on earnings is nil, up to a balance of $2 million. So if we look at this in terms of superannuation, if you earn $100,000 while in accumulation phase, you're likely to pay 15% tax on those earnings, therefore $15,000 of tax. If you're in pension mode, there's zero tax on earnings. So the great thing is if you earn $100,000, you get to keep it all. There's no tax payable. What is Division 296? So Division 296 is a new tax that's due to come into effect from 1 July 2026. It's an additional tax on member balances that are over $3 million as of the 30th of June 2027. So the legislation comes into effect from 1 July this year, but then the calculation of that tax will not be known until you reach the 30th of June 2027. There's an additional 15% tax on individual super balances that exceed the 3 million cap. For those members that have a balance greater than $10 million, the tax will be 40%. So it's another 10% on top of the 15% above the $3 million. The tax is calculated on a proportionate formula based on the income and realized gains of the portfolio. So unrealized gains is not calculated in this equation. There's a general assessment that will be required at the end of every financial year to determine what that tax liability will be. The member also has the option to choose to pay the tax personally, or they can choose to release those benefits from their superannuation fund. If we look at the recent legislative changes, as I mentioned, delayed start date to 1 July 26. Unrealised gains no longer taxed. That was the initial proposal. And then the great benefit, or one of the great parts is there's indexation applied to the 3 million threshold as well as the $10 million threshold. So previously these were not to be indexed, but now are indexed. So that's great news for investors. In terms of calculating the Division 296 tax liability, there's several steps required. One, we need to determine the opening balance and closing total super balance. So total super balance refers to your member balance across all your superannuation accounts. So some people may have an industry fund as well as a self-managed super fund, or they may even have multiple industry funds, depending if they work in different sectors. Step 2 is to determine the proportion of the total balance over $3 million. Then we look at the superannuation earnings. So that's income, dividends, realised capital gains. And then we use a multiple of step 3 and step 2. And then we calculate the tax payable at 15% on this additional amount. Got a case study here. So if a client has a member balance of $3.5 million as of the 1st of July 2026, and the fund grows due to income and realised capital gains for a closing total super balance at 30 June 2027, for a closing balance of $4 million, we've effectively made $500,000. So we determined that the proportion of that total super balance over $3 million. So if the balance is grown from, it's at $4 million, it's $1 million above the $3 million threshold. Therefore, 25% of that member's total super balance is above that, or will be attributed to the Division 296 calculation. Then we determined the superannuation earnings. So we determined that the income realised and dividends and realised capital gains is $500,000. And then we apply this percentage of the total super balance above $3 million at 25% against those earnings of $500,000 for assessable earnings of $125,000. And then the Division 296 calculation of 15% is applied to the $125,000. So in this case, there would be about $18,750 of tax payable. In the scheme of things, if we work out $500,000, paying $18,750 of tax on $500,000 of earnings, the effective tax rate on that's about 3.7%. So it's, while it seems like a large number, but in the proportionally in terms of the earnings and the tax payable, it's not a huge amount based on a percentage factor. Some considerations that should be considered in terms of your superannuation balance. If your super balance is over 3 million, you're paying an extra 30% on those earnings. If your super balance is over $10 million, then potential tax on those earnings is at 40%. So everyone's circumstances are different. So what we've got here is if you look to invest in your own name and take some of that money out of superannuation, you just need to look at what earnings rate or what tax rate you would be paying on the earnings if you withdrew money from super and invested that money personally. So I guess what we're saying here is your income from the investment is greater than 45,000, then it might be a consideration in terms of taking some money out of super. What should you do about Division 296? In most circumstances, it's to do nothing at the present unless your balance is over $10 million. The other thing too is future governments could revoke or change the terms of legislation once you withdraw money from super. So it's best to just keep it in your fund until you know you're certain. Because the challenge is always getting money back into super. If you've got a balance of $3 million, you're not going to be able to get money back into super. And then the other thing is we suggest is speak with your advisor about strategies you should consider. Other legislative changes that are due to come into effect from 1 July. Concessional limit will increase from 30,000 to 32.5. The non-concessional limit will increase from 120 to 130,000. That also means if you're looking to bring forward 2 years of contributions under the bring forward rule, you can get 390,000 into superannuation. That's subject to your super balance being under certain limits. The pension transfer balance, this is how much you can convert from accumulation into tax-free pension mode, will increase from 2 million to 2.1. Therefore, considering some of these changes that will come into effect from 1 July, there's some more planning opportunities by deferring strategies to next financial year. But again, speak with your professional about what strategy is appropriate for your situation. We've got question time. We might leave it to the end unless anyone's got a question right now for me.
Thank you, Eben. I'll just check the chat. We'll save questions for the end there. Thank you, Eben. Now we'll move on to Nick Coutts from Mellor Olsson, who discuss estate planning and succession planning. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Eben, for having me along this morning. So there's a bit to get through, so I'm going to try and keep my pace up as best we can while still being clear. So a few things I'm going to touch on today. Some of these things dovetail with the changes that Eben was just discussing. Some of them are a more general estate planning and succession planning thing, but I thought since we're all here talking about preparing for the future, it's probably a good reason to have a touch base on these things. So the most important document in this area is a will, and I think most people have a general idea about what a will can do. So most people know that it sets out the testator, that's the old-fashioned Latin word for a will maker. It sets out what the testator can do with their property after they pass away. More on that shortly about what actually counts as the testator's property for the purposes of a will. And the other important thing to keep in mind is who's going to be in charge of it all, who's going to be the executor of your estate. So the appointment of an executor is a really critical decision to get right. A lot of people will just have, husband and wife will appoint each other, and then if they're both gone, they'll appoint the kids. That might work fine in a lot of circumstances, but if you've got a situation where there are complex structures going on, if you've got a farming business where there are trusts and companies and partnerships and whatever else, it may actually be preferable to have someone in as an independent executor, especially if there's a risk that the kids will either, two of them might gang up against the other one and start making decisions that aren't favorable to one of them, Or even if they don't actually gang up on each other, there might be an impression amongst the kids that one of them's got their nose out of joint because the other one's making all the decisions. So in some situations, it might be a good idea to bring in an independent executor. And if you've got children who are still minors, because remember, it's not just old people that need a will, it's everyone. So if you do have minor children, then you can also use your will to talk about who's going to be the guardian of those children if you pass away. When I said before that the important thing to keep in mind is what is the testator's property. So a will can deal with the solely held assets of the will maker. Depending on the way that superannuation has been set up, that may include the superannuation balance or it may not. There are things called binding death benefit nominations with superannuation funds, and some people will direct super to go into their estate and form part of the asset pool that's being divided by the will. And there'll be some people who actually use the superannuation as like a balancing tool between the on-farm and off-farm children. And in those situations, the super might actually go directly to the off-farm child. There's pros and cons there about whether super goes inside or outside, but it's important for the client and for you to know, well, where is it going? What are we going to do with it? And make sure all the documents are singing in harmony there. And when we've got trusts as well, so the assets that are within the trust, they don't form part of the assets that's being divided by the will. Usually when you've got a trust, you will hand over control of the trust through the will if you haven't already handed it over during your lifetime. But then there are some trust-related assets that may be relevant, such as if you have a beneficiary loan. So there have been, distributions over time, but you haven't taken all of the cash out and your loan account has built up. Then if that's not forgiven, if the slate's not wiped clean on that, then that loan is payable into your estate and that is dealt with by the will. So again, it's a matter of making sure that we take a good look at your entire situation, not just walk in and say, everything to the wife and then equal shares to the kids, because that might not always actually do the job depending on what we need to look at there. And the key thing to remember in the context of these incoming Division 296 changes is now I know Eben mentioned a moment ago that for most people at the moment, there'll be no need to do big withdrawals. It all depends on personal circumstances. And I'm definitely not going to jump over onto that planning side of the fence. I'm the words guy, not the numbers guy in this arrangement. But if there is restructuring to be done, it's worth looking back at your will to see whether that needs to be updated as well. I see lots of clients who say, I did my will 25 years ago and I don't think it needs an update. Well, some things have changed in the last 25 years. There might be some more tips and tricks that we can put into it to get a better result. But also, if there was a plan where super was going to go outside of the estate to balance up between some of the kids, and if we then end up withdrawing out of super because that suits your circumstances best, that might upset that balance that we had in place. So it's important to get these things reviewed properly. A quick word on the two different types of will. One of these types of will is probably forefront of mind for a few people after the budget announcements the other week. But firstly, there's a simple standard will. This is what most people anticipate when they're talking about a will, where I say, right, I'm going to divide all my assets equally between Brendan and Eben. That's good news for you guys. You each get about half a guitar and then some debt. And that goes directly, those assets go directly into their name. Any cash goes directly into their bank account. That's a simple standard type of will. There's also a testamentary trust type of will where when you pass away, rather than Brendan's inheritance going directly into Brendan's name and his bank account, also, sorry, Brendan, I'm just going to pick on you for the example because I need a name. But instead of just going directly into Brendan's name, a trust is actually created after I pass away. and Brendan receives those his inheritance into that trust. Depending on how much asset protection we need to put in place, Brendan might be in control of his own trust. Or if I think Brendan's a bit of a loose unit and I'm worried that he might just waste his inheritance, then I may actually put someone else in control of Brendan's trust. So you can separate the benefit from the control with a testamentary trust, which goes towards this idea of asset protection, which is the first bullet point we've got there under the TT will. The second bullet point is a bit of an interesting one at the moment. Up until budget announcement night, there were some pretty favourable rules for testamentary trusts in terms of income splitting and income streaming. But of course, the proposed changes to bring in the flat 30% tax rate look like they may change that. As Eben said, nothing has been formally passed yet, so I don't want to delve too much into speculation about what all that could be, because there is a chance that it could all still fall over somehow. But even then, that doesn't mean a testamentary trust structure is now yesterday's news, because the asset protection advantages can still be quite beneficial, and you don't get any of those with a standard will. I've got a slide here on what happens if you die without a will. My advice is don't die without a will. Everything's a lot more complicated. And, there's a chance that public trustee has to get involved, especially if you've got minor children. And we don't want to go down that road. Outside of the will, so obviously the will only operates from the time that you die. There are two other documents, power of attorney and advance care directive, that operate while you're alive, but if you lose the capacity to make certain decisions for yourself. Power of attorney is the legal and financial side of things. So if you lose the ability to make your own decisions, who's going to make those legal and financial decisions for you? Who's going to sign documents on your behalf, and all that stuff? Important thing to consider here is, again, who are we appointing in charge? It could be just one, or you may have multiple, or you may even put in a hierarchy to say, well, happy for Brendan to be in charge, but if Brendan can't act, then I'm happy for Eben to step up to the plate. Or we've also started, for a lot of our clients recently, we've started putting in this threshold idea, which I find a lot of clients appreciate. It's a good balance between flexibility and security, where I could say, if Brendan and Eben need to do something which is, paying my electricity bill, well, they don't need to sit down and have a family conference about that. They can just pay the bill and get that done. But if they need to buy one of those, claw machines to get me in and out of bed or whatever it might be, and that might be $10,000 or $15,000 over a certain amount, I want the two of them to be working together, to be signing off on every document. That way, it's a good balance between the flexibility of making sure that everything I need to do can still happen. But if there's a big expenditure to be made, we've got more than one person involved to make sure that the correct decision's being made. Other key thing with a modern power of attorney document, because again, I see a lot of clients who say, well, I did this in 1998 and I think it's still fine. Those old power of attorney documents typically say, I appoint so-and-so as my attorney, and they can do anything that an attorney can lawfully do. One big, broad, open sentence. What we have been finding in the last kind of 10 or so years is that the institutions that your attorney is dealing with, so if you lose your marbles and can't run your own affairs anymore, then your attorney needs to go and manage your bank account on your behalf. The bank has looked at that broad, vague sentence and said, well, that's not really good enough for us. We actually want specific things that your attorney can and can't do. And we've been finding that with banks, and importantly, we've been finding that with super funds as well. So a modern power of attorney will have a specific paragraph or series of paragraphs that says what your attorney can and can't do in relation to super. And that may include things like withdrawing part of my super balance into my bank account if required, and it may also include renewing a binding death benefit nomination, because a lot of those will only last for 3 years, and so we need them to be renewed every 3 years, even if you can't do it yourself. And that would be especially important if we had someone who was at a point where withdrawing super to get around this Division 296 stuff, if that does make sense. If the power of attorney that was done in 1998 doesn't allow the attorney to then go and do that, well, that obviously that client then is not in an ideal situation. So one of those important documents to make sure that you've reviewed it relatively recently and made any updates if you need to. Advanced Care Directive, this is the third document that I mentioned. This is for health, lifestyle, medical treatment. It's not really going to overlap with the Division 296 stuff that we're mentioning today, but this is in terms of if you can't talk to the doctors and nurses anymore, who do you want to have talking to them, making decisions on your behalf? For a lot of people, that's going to be the partner and then the kids. The important thing about this document, as I see it, is if you have particularly strong feelings about what happens at the grisly end if you've only got weeks or months to live, or you're in the terminal phase of a terminal illness or whatever it might be. And if your feeling is pull the plug, fill me up with pain relief and let me slip away quietly, we can put wording in the document to reflect that. Now, it's going to be worded a little more legally than how I've just summarized it there. But the idea behind that is that it takes the decision off of your family. They don't have to sit around going, oh, don't know what mum and dad wanted. We never really spoke about it, because you've written it down and you've signed your name on it. That's, I think, the key feature of the Advanced Care Directive. I'll briefly mention that there was at the start of last year, there was some new legislation that came in. So there used to be 3 very old acts that governed all of what we'll call wills and estates. So there was the Administration and Probate Act of 1919, there was the Wills Act of 1936, and the Inheritance Family Provision Act of 1975. So that's 3 pretty old pieces of legislation. Those were all wrapped up into a new act last year, Succession Act 2023. There's a couple of interesting things to mention here. So now, for the first time, stepchildren can make a contest against your estate. We haven't seen any cases on that yet, because this law is still very new, so I can't tell you exactly what that looks like. But previously, the door wasn't open for stepchildren to contest an estate, and now in certain circumstances, it is. There's also this new idea that when someone's contesting a will, the primary consideration of the court is what the testator wanted, what the will maker wanted. Again, I can't give you a guarantee on exactly what that looks like, because we haven't seen the courts make any decisions on it. But in the context of, it might be a good idea to review your existing documents through the lens of the Division 296 stuff. It might also be a good idea to review them in the lens of these laws being changed. So just in case there's a delicate balance that needs to be struck for some documents. And part of that, and I think this is part of what Eben was saying as well, is we like talking about the phrase succession planning. The idea behind that is our approach, the approach that we recommend taking, is that, yes, your will, your power of attorney, and your advanced care directive, those are the 3 key documents. But really, succession planning is more than just those 3 documents. It's a little bit like if you've got a footy team with 3-star players on it, but there's no overall game plan, those 3-star players probably aren't going to give you a premiership trophy at the end of the year, because without a game plan, there's only so much they can do. This is especially true of farmers that have got an operation that's got several moving parts. It's not uncommon to have the land held in one trust, plant and equipment held in another trust. There might be a partnership, there might be some loan accounts. There's lots of moving parts here, and every one of those structures has its own set of rules to play by, and we need to make sure that everything's singing in harmony, both from a tax planning perspective and also from a succession planning perspective. Because if you've got different documents doing different things, that's probably not going to land you a good result at the end of the day. And in this, through this lens of succession planning, there are three things that we typically see our clients are looking for, which is to leave a viable business for the next generation. There's no point in hanging on too long and running it into the ground and then not handing anything over. That's probably not what you spent your life working towards. Number two, maintain family harmony. The key thing here is that there should be no surprises. Reading the will is a kind of a Hollywood concept. There's not really in Australia this idea of we all sit around the lawyer's office and I read the will word for word and tell people what they're getting. I'm more than happy to read a will if people want me to, but usually once they find out the hourly rate that we charge for my attendances, people aren't interested in me reading a will word for word. But what we don't want after someone passes away is, in this hypothetical reading of the will, we don't want shocks and gasps around the room where various family members find out that things aren't going the way they were anticipating. And the key to that is to get onto it early and to have these discussions as early as you can. And then number three, we also want to ensure that there are sufficient funds for retirement, especially if, mum and dad have spent the whole life working and living on the farm. They need to hand that over to the next generation at some point because it's getting beyond them. But if mum and dad can no longer live on the farm property, and if they need to go into a retirement village or a nursing home or whatever kind of facility it might be, or even if they just need another house that's, closer to the local town, it is often the case that mum and dad have poured all of their assets into the farming business. So if they hand that over, we want to make sure that mum and dad are not left high and dry. Again, different families are going to have different ways around this. Usually we can have some kind of agreement in place that says, right, well, in return for handing over control of the farming business, whichever child receives that is going to make the following promises to make sure that retirement gets properly funded. Different mechanisms are going to work for different people there, but that's the objective to have in mind, I think. And really the way to do that is to get everyone, all of the advisors and all of the family on board sooner rather than later. Sometimes the advisors might not agree on everything. And actually, I think that's a pretty good thing, because if your accountant and your financial planner and your lawyer, if they have a discussion and all three of them have a different opinion about which is a better way forward, by the time they end up coming to a consensus, you know that you're actually going to get the right plan, and you're going to get the best plan that works for you. So get everyone on board and communicate effectively to make sure that there are no surprises, and definitely don't set it and forget it, I think is the key thing there. And with all of these things, there's no one size fits all, because every family is different. The amounts of money that we're talking about are different. The way that the farming structure is set up is different. And also the balance between on-farm and off-farm children and promises that have been made to the various kids through their life. There's just so many variables there. So, and there we go. That was me.
Thanks for that, Nick. Appreciate that. Maybe while I've got you, I'll go through a couple of questions that we've got
Sure.
in regards to succession planning and estate planning. For those who, I guess, what would you, in your experience, see are common estate planning mistakes made by farming families? We've talked about the succession planning and estate planning, I guess, is as a process. It's not just the paperwork that comes through.
Yep.
We're asking for no surprises, so constant discussions around the kitchen table, so that nobody is left, I guess, out in the cold or finds out the surprise at the end when they're already dealing with a lot of probate, death, grief, and everything as well. And never mind the paperwork. What would be some sort of common missteps or trip ups that you'd find?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think not getting onto it early is probably the biggest one that we see. Unfortunately, I've had to over my years of being an estate planning, succession planning lawyer, I've had to jump into, hospitals and do bedside wills and all the rest of it, because some people think that they're invincible, and it's not until the doctor gives them the bad news. Obviously, that's an extreme case, but it is very, very difficult to get complex estate planning right at a hospital bed, as I'm sure
Yep.
everyone tuning in today can imagine. So, important thing is to get on top of it. And I know that I've repeated it a few times already, but not assuming that, oh, well, I did my will in 1995, so that'll be fine. And I guess another one that I hear quite a bit is, um, I appreciate that clients will come along and say, look, I don't want any of your highfalutin lawyer fancy talk. I just want a simple document that I can read and understand. And I appreciate that. I think that's a worthwhile goal to have. The reality is, even a simple will these days is running to 5 or 6 or 7 pages long. And something I hear a lot is, oh, well, back when my parents died, they just had a half-page will, and that worked out fine. And it probably did, but they also probably had a lot less complicated structure. With the way that tax rules keep changing, the way that things like stamp duty and all that stuff keeps getting more and more complicated, the will gets more and more complicated as a result. And then by the time you add in other structures like handing over control of trusts and all the rest of it, these things do start to run a little long. So I think getting on top of it early, and yeah, finding someone who understands what it is that you're looking for, and what it is that can be done.
Great, thank you. You spoke about, I guess, handing over control operation of the farm to the next generation and trying to treat those kids that are on the farm at the moment um, equally or fairly with those children who might be have left the farm to go off farm for another career. Um, I could imagine that that would be probably cause for a lot of discussion, if not arguments, inside families. Is there a framework? Is there sort of questions that need to be asked again, always early? And appreciate that these are general advice. Nothing is specific to circumstances for today. But is there any framework that you might suggest to those sort of families dealing with succession like that?
Yeah, I think one of the key things there is when we've got on-farm and off-farm children. So something that we see a lot is, um, mum and dad poured their heart and soul for all of their lifetime into the farming operation. They also poured all of their money into the farming operation. And when you've got on-farm and off-farm children, we can't necessarily ensure that all of the on and off-farm kids are going to walk away with an equal amount of value, especially with what farming land has done in the last kind of 5 or 6 years, where I've seen some of it go up by, 4 times, 5 times as much as it was 5 years ago. It's now very difficult to get everyone to walk away with an equal dollar value. But what we've put in place for some people is, there might be an agreement that, well, it's, the land and control of the trust that the land is in and whatever else, that's going to go to the on-farm child. But over the next X number of years after we pass away, he or she is going to slowly pay an amount to the off-farm children so that we can do some balancing act there. Sometimes if there's a healthy superannuation balance, then we can use that as a bit of a balancing tool for the off-farm kids, so that they get, something that isn't tied up with the farm. But yeah, it really comes down to there's no one size fits all strategy. It's, given the pieces that any particular family has, how can we fit it together so that everything works as best we can, and that the goal is not always going to be equal share for everyone. It's what is the most fair that we can get in the circumstances.
everyone thinks that they are, I guess, missing out on something, then maybe everyone's got the fair share of it. If there's no winners
Yeah.
and losers, but everyone's sort of a bit miffed by something.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Nick. Thank you very much.
Classic phrase. It's a classic phrase we use in any time we're doing a negotiation or anything like that. Is if everyone walks away from the table a little bit disappointed, it was probably a good deal for everyone. So
Exactly. Appreciate that, Nick. Thank you.
thank you.
For you, Evan, I'll just have you roll in front there, mate.
Yeah, sure.
Division 296. If your super balance is below $3 million, but it's expected to exceed that in the future, 296, I guess the milestone for that is come July 1 next year.
Yep.
So is there anything would there be strategies that families listening now would want to either reduce that or slow that rate of growth in their superannuation?
Not at the present. When we've looked at some preliminary numbers on potential growth of your fund, at the present, it's probably best to do nothing. I guess the reason for that is, look, you need to be earning a fair bit of investment returns on that capital if you choose to pull out a superannuation to a point where you start paying tax. And based on the example I provided in my slide, even if you made $100,000 of earnings taxable, the tax on that we calculated, or the 125,000 tax was about $18,000 of tax. If you earn that same amount of money in your own name, you're probably going to pay more than that in personal income tax. So for that reason, you're better off just leaving it as is. But then again, it's also worthwhile just engaging with your advisor. If you've already got existing assets in your own name, you don't want to try and build that up to the point where you just incur more tax. So like everyone's circumstances are different. It's important just to have that discussion.
It was a point in your slide as well but can we just clarify that whilst there was chatter and discussion about taxing unrealized gains, I think it was over $3 million, but correct me if that was
That's correct.
But that is off the table. That's not.
Yep. I think government came to the party and realised that it was bad policy, and then it was also hard to know, particularly if we consider, and back to Nick's point as well, when he mentioned we've seen how much farmland has appreciated in value over the last 5 or 6 years. I have a number of clients that would have farmland held within super, and that's probably been the most pressing question, in the fact that if your farmland parcels jump from 3 mil to 5 mil, are they going to have to pay tax on that unrealized gain? And I think it's not easy for somebody to provide liquidity when majority of the asset is farmland. You can't just divvy up a portion and sell off an acre here. It's not that easy. So definitely, it wasn't practical legislation or proposal at the time. So yeah, that one's.
It seemed to unfairly hit regional farming communities, given they were kind of asset or land rich.
Yep.
But didn't have that cash flow coming through to pay their bills as they wished.
Yeah, exactly right.
No, that's all the questions that have come through. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you both to Nick and to Eben today. As we've sort of tried to reiterate across the webinar, today's advice from both Nick and Eben from Mellor Olsson and William Buck is general in nature. The case studies are obviously case studies as they are, but I'll share both Nick and Eben's details following this webinar. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to just pass them on to both of you. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.